Hi, Kathy.
Hi, Camber. So good to see you.
How are you?
Doing very well. It's a nice, bright, sunshiny day here. How about you?
I am also doing well. I want to give people a minute or two to kind of climb
Yeah.
in. I got a little trigger happy on the countdown, so we're gonna wait just one more second here and see if some people trickle in, and
Sure.
then we'll introduce ourselves. So, in the meantime, we will just hang out.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And while we're doing that, I am just going to um sorry, is my voice okay?
Yeah, you sound good. How about me?
You sound great. I got a little bit of an update there that it was like having trouble with my voice. Okay, so it is 2 minutes in. We're gonna go ahead and get started. So first things first, I'm Camber Clements. I am the marketing manager at Give WP, which is a stellar WP company. And today we have Kathy, and Kathy is the director of marketing for Cadence WP and has been working with WordPress for over a decade. She has both technical and marketing experience and has worked with a number of brands in the WordPress space, which were focused on security. She's helped organize both WordCamp Phoenix and WCUS, and she currently lives outside of Denton, Texas, where she can be found walking golden retrievers or hanging out in horse barns. So, Kathy, tell us a little bit more about yourself, what you do at iThemes specifically, and then can we talk about your golden retrievers?
Yeah, sure, definitely. So I, in the 90s, got bit by this thing called the internet. So I taught myself how to do everything, right? It was really an exciting time. And when WordPress came along, it just made sense. Everything with how it was put together from a technical standpoint matched like how I was developing things. And so I was blogging already at the time using like Blogger and Movable Type.
Mhm.
There's a flashback or a blast from the past. And WordPress came along and it just made sense. So I just started using that for blogs. And then as plugins started to come into the space, it just made sense for me to stop writing so much code and just use other people's tools and extend it if I needed to. I have always been really interested in security in the 90s when I was getting my chops as a
Mhm.
developer, because my training in college was like speech communication and marketing and all of that. And so, I had to learn a lot. And I had this job. I was a web developer. I inherited a server from someone that I assumed was very technical and had set everything up all right, and it got hacked. And so I just was thrust into this world of security, learned how to hack, learned how to spoof emails, all kinds of things.
Mhm.
And so I've just been like baking all of that security knowledge I gained from
Yeah.
going through a hack into everything I did. And as I was getting more and more into WordPress and security kind of just go together like, I'm going to sound real Southern, peanut butter and jelly on a sandwich, right? Or like Whataburger in Texas.
Burger
It's
in
just,
Texas.
it goes together. So I've been really focused on the security aspects around WordPress and have really over like the past 5 or 6 years really has been cool to see just how everyone that I come into contact with, I've really seen this trajectory of WordPress becoming more and more secure.
Mhm.
And, but of course, security is in everyone's hands. I think everyone's responsible for security. It's not just like this niche topic
Yeah,
because it affects every aspect of our digital lives. So
that's perfect. And that's a really great segue into what we're talking about today, which is, of course, how to keep nonprofit sites safe, which
yeah.
I would imagine most of the tips are applicable to anyone that owns a website, right? But specifically, we wanted to address it with nonprofits because there is a lot of commerce that happens on nonprofit sites, right? There's a lot of donations that are happening. Some sell swag. There's a lot of data collection.
Right.
And last month, we talked about privacy policies and being transparent about how donor data is collected, stored, and used with Termageddon. So this month's topic feels like a really great, excellent follow up to like not only like do you need to know how to ensure your donors that you're keeping their data safe, but how to actually keep things safe and what to do, and then what to do if something happens and there's a breach. So the first thing that I want to get started with is we covered some tips, right, on security and keeping your nonprofit site safe in a blog that you wrote for us, which Drew, the host, is going to drop in the chat in a minute if anybody wants to read it. There it is. Perfect. So I want to dig in on those tips right away, just to get right to the action items. So the first one that you talked about in your article was SSL, which are secure socket layers. And that is the security certificate that displays to site visitors that your site is safe. It is the S in HTTPS, which most people know to look for now, right? So tell us more about using an SSL security certificates, and then what the best way is to go about like ensuring your site has one.
Sure. Well, when the internet first started, it was okay to do HTTP and to not actually have a certificate. So a lot of older sites still to this day don't have a certificate. And I think it was about 2014 when Google came out with an announcement basically saying if you don't have SSL on your site, there's going to be search engine optimization or SERPs, like in the search engine result pages, there's going to be an impact on displaying that. So now people started thinking about secure certificates for SEO, whereas previously people were just like, okay, well, if I put my credit card in, there better be an S at the end of that HTTP.
Right.
And that's how people really had thought about. So now we're really seeing that hosting providers especially have really made this just one of the line items that they put on their offering as a host. Like, we're going to take care of this for you. An SSL certificate is included in the hosting. A company called I don't even know who owns it, but it's Let's Encrypt. They have free certificates. So there's tons of hosting providers out there that'll just give you a free certificate. And the technique of like what's happening. So you have your browser, and we're in a browser right now, but you're in a browser watching us on YouTube, and you probably see the HTTPS or you see the lockup on the screen. That means that this is happening through a secure connection between your browser and the server that's providing access to this data. So that's basically all it's covering. It's not covering security of your FTP program. It's not covering security of logging into your hosting account or your database or anything. There's lots of different things that go into security, but this is really critical if you're taking donations. If you're taking donations and people are putting in their credit card or PayPal information, however they're taking it, that lock, they're going to be looking for it. I think everybody at this point is trained to look for that lock to make sure that the connection between their browser and the server that the information is being sent to is indeed encrypted. And that means that nobody, if you're on a public Wi-Fi and maybe it's not a secure public Wi-Fi, if it was just HTTP and a hacker was sniffing the traffic on that network, they could see that credit card information. So basically that's what HTTPS and secure socket layers are protecting. They're encrypting browser traffic to the server, but that's all it does.
Yeah. So, but basically it just makes it so that, like you said, if someone is looking at the information coming here, they can't actually identify any donor information that's coming through. They're not going to be able to hop in there and go, oh, credit card, I'm going to yoink, take that, and I'm going to commit some fraud. So that's really what it does, is just protects that information as it goes from point A to point B.
Right. It's just connecting from the browser to the server, and but that's important, and people are looking for that. And it's really important to have, because when you are a nonprofit and you are collecting credit card information, donor information, you want, but if you have a website, you want to establish trust. And this is just one element of establishing trust. So,
yeah. And I think that's really important to remember, like, even when we talk about non-donation commerce, right? Like, whenever I'm shopping online, I want to feel very safe that whatever credit card information or my address or my email, all of that is going to be, kept private based on the security certificate of the website. And so I think that there's a lot of, we talk a lot about the fact that donations are commerce and you have to treat them as such. And so you want to ensure that, just like a consumer who's shopping online wants to ensure that their credit card information is safe, they're going to want to see the same from a nonprofit that they're giving donations to as well.
Exactly. The problem is it's just SSL gives that sense of security, but what happens after your credit card information is submitted and it's gone to that server, there's a whole slew of other things that we need to talk about too.
Yeah, which we're definitely going to get to. There's several tips that we're going to cover. The next one is strong passwords, which is definitely like an important topic to cover. And it's something that I personally struggled with, especially when I was younger. I would use the same password on every single website ever. And I was like, yeah, who cares? If they hack my Netflix, whatever. But also, I wasn't thinking like, okay, well, now they can go try my bank account and they can drain my bank account because I'm using the same password there. So when we talk about creating passwords, like what are the best practices to ensure that your passwords are strong and specifically unique across all the different types of logins that you have?
Right. Well, we'll talk about why this is important first. There's a website called Have I Been Pwned? So it's like owned, except instead of an O, there's a P there. It's hacker terminology of pwnage, of like you've been owned type of thing. I think it came from gamers or whatever, but Have I Been Pwned? This website is managed by someone who's very well known in the security industry named Troy Hunt. And you can go there and put in your email address, and I can guarantee you your email address has been involved in a breach. And breaches happen because other sites, it's not even necessarily related to your site. It's not your fault. But let's say you decided you really want this really funny t-shirt and the only place you can get it is from some random place you found on, Frugal or whatever. And so you set up an account with them and you use that same password that you use everywhere, and they're not good with their security. So somebody gets into their server, gets all of the customer data, and that ends up in a breach. That's a breach. So they can get in various ways, and we'll talk more about that later, about keeping your site safe. But this is why unique passwords are so important. Especially if you're new to a site and you've never logged in there before and you're not really sure of the owners, but you just really want that cool shirt, making sure you use a unique password. So that password is just a throwaway. It ends up in a breach. Who cares? You're not using it anywhere else. And you need to consider that not just for like the small random site. We've seen breaches with, oh my gosh, so many large companies. LinkedIn has had a breach.
Twitter
Target
had
has
one
had a
not
breach.
long ago.
Yeah. Their LastPass password manager experienced a breach that also affected, people's vaults and the passwords that they have stored in there. Expect breaches to happen and expect every password to be a throwaway password, especially when it comes to things like bank accounts and your email address, your email account. If you're using Gmail, making sure that that's unique, making sure that your website password is unique as well. So all very important. I can tell you one interesting story of a site that I worked on incident response for, and it was a large site, very difficult hack. And it got in because a guy had used his email address on a site, and he used his business domain. So it was like joe@bigcompany.com, and he reused a password, and a hacker got hold of that in a breach and said, I wonder if bigcompany.com, he used the same password there, logged in. He had admin access to WordPress, and it turned into a nightmare. So unique passwords everywhere, strong passwords. Use a password manager. There's tons of places. If you do generate random password, there's like sites that'll give you like a random string that you can use. So
tell me about, this might be a better question for later, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it right now. When we talk about like the sites that generate passwords for you, right? Chrome will often generate a password for you if you would like it to. And then it prompts you to then save it in Chrome. Is that a good option? Is saving it in Chrome versus possibly using like a 1Pass or something like an external password manager? What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts on that are, well, there's a lot of security that goes into into your browsers that goes in, Safari and Apple have that same type of
Mhm.
setup where you can save passwords in the browser, and it's stored in an encrypted way. Here's my issue. Malware can end up on your computer.
Mhm.
And if malware ends up on your computer, that somehow compromises like the login to your computer and they can get into Chrome. Um, Depending on how you have it set up, if maybe you have biometrics associated with it, that like passwords don't get populated unless you have biometrics, like you should do your fingerprint or face ID or something like that.
Mhm.
But if your computer can be accessed in that way, and you don't have your passwords stored in a secure way where it's putting some kind of factor where you have to authenticate either with your password or with a biometric,
Mhm.
that can be that could be an intrusion
Yeah.
vector. So I would strongly recommend using something like a password manager. One Password is very good. Bitwarden's very good. NordPass is very good. So there's a number of good password managers that I would recommend using, and just to add that extra layer of security rather than doing it in the browser. But I will say this, for all my test sites, storing them in the passwords are in the browser because I don't care.
Right.
Somebody hacks that, somebody, whatever. But like my bank account, that's in a password manager. And I also use like blind passwords in there. So if somebody ever did get into my password manager, they still don't know like the extra characters that go at the
Yeah.
end of the password
Right.
that's up here.
It's in
So
your brain. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So, but I'm like super paranoid about the things, and security is a continuum. It's not like
Mhm.
do this for every single
And
thing.
your
Test
babies.
sites, who cares?
Yeah.
You know, there's some things you just don't have the same consideration for, but there's some
Right.
things that you really want to tighten security on, but only you really know for each individual
Right.
account how
For
you
each
want it secured.
individual account, how you wanna keep it safe. And so when we're talking about test sites, you're not hosting any data there. There's not customer information there. There's not anything. So that's not necessarily
Right.
important, right? So it's more when it's like I need to protect myself and I need to protect anyone whose information I have. I want to ensure that their information is not accessible,
Right.
or private information, possibly about my company, or if there's an admin dashboard that's accessible. We want to make sure to keep those things under lock and key. It's
Right.
funny because I was talking to my dad recently, and we were talking about something had happened at work, and I was like, "Well, where do you keep all your passwords?" And he was like, "Well, I keep them in a note on my phone." And I was like, "For why? Like, don't do that." I was like, "Is the note at least like locked?" And he was like, "Yeah, it's locked." And I was like, "Okay, Dad, please, can I show you how to set up 1Pass?" Because like you're gonna get yourself in trouble. Even if it like, he works for like a medical company, and I'm like, if someone gets access to your email or something, like you have everyone's information in there, you're gonna be in so much trouble.
Yeah.
But he was just like, "Yeah, it doesn't matter." I'm like, "Okay."
Yeah, I just trained my 14-year-old daughter how to use a password manager, and so
Mhm.
she's doing that now for the first time. She's like, "Well, where do I put my master password? What if I forget it?" And I'm like, "Well, I showed her some strategies of like
Yeah.
storing it, and she's like, "Can I put this in notes?" And I'm like, "Well, notes, where do notes go? Where are they
Yeah.
stored,
Where are they
really?" And
stored?
she's like,
Right.
"Oh, I get them on my computer too. They're
Yeah.
in the
They're on
cloud."
the Yeah.
So I could just see her like putting it all
Putting
together.
all
Like
the
she figured
process.
out like
Yeah.
this is not
Right.
as
That's why this
secure as it.
isn't great. Right.
Yeah.
So another, when we're talking about layers of security, so we've already talked about that additional layer of the SSL. We're talking about an additional layer of, password management, unique passwords, strong passwords, password generators. Another really interesting layer, and I think people absolutely hate it, but it's also a very important way to ensure that people that you don't want accessing your information can't access it. And that's two-factor authentication,
Yeah.
right? So that's like when if you log in to your GiveWP account, you get a two-factor prompt, which means that there's a code that you have to enter that has been sent to your email. And then that's when it lets you in. And that's to ensure that no one else is accessing your account. And it just adds that extra layer of security. Like even Google might prompt it through open this app and ensure that this is the same person. So, how and when should two-factor authentication be implemented on nonprofit sites?
Right. Well, two factor, the problem with two factor, people hate it. I
Mhm.
know. I'm a security professional. Well, I wear the hat of a security professional. Um, I hate two-factor. I really do. It's just adds complexity. But it also adds complexity for hackers. So I put up with it because I have to.
Yep.
And Verizon puts out a report on data security every year. And the last one, their stats were less than 30% of people actually used two-factor authentication as a general rule. So I know people don't like it. There are cool things happening in the future with something called passkeys that's going to make our life so much easier. I won't go there yet. But two-factor authentication. So let's say one of the biggest attacks that we see on the iThemes side, being on over 1 million sites, is we see brute forcing attacks. Because there's so many breaches, there are databases of password combinations, some tied to your email address, that are out there and that hackers access. And all they have to do is set up a script that says, take a username, take a password, and just go. And it will just, it's automated. It's just bot driven attacks. And let's say you have a very strong password, but that very strong password ended up randomized somehow in a breach, and boom, they've got a hit. They've got your username and they found the password just by chance. Even a strong, unique password can end up in a breach database. So for protection, two-factor authentication is a great thing for you. It's really important for you to use on your WordPress site for admin accounts that basically have access to everything. It's also a great thing to offer to your customers and allow them to opt into using two-factor authentication, because it gives them, it shows them that you know what security is and you are taking precautions in order to protect their account and to protect your server, because there can be, somebody can log into, like, say, a breached customer account or a donor account. And if, like, there's a plugin vulnerability, they can escalate into an admin account by just testing various scripts. I've seen it done. So, and that kind of intrusion vector is a possibility. So to show your donors that you have security in mind, it just shows them, you know, it's not just the lock in the corner that shows that you have SSL. You're showing another way that you show that security is important to you. It just establishes trust.
Right. And so that kind of goes back to last month's topic about privacy policies and everything. There's, of course, all the legal ramifications of things that you need to do and take care of, but there's all these little things that you can do to ensure you are showcasing to your donors, like, we care about you, we care about your information, we care that all of that information is safe and that you always feel really good giving to us, and you're never concerned, you know, about what's going to happen. And of course, if something does happen, we're going to take those precautions, but allowing people to opt in, and if, you know, maybe you don't force it on them, but allowing them to opt into 2FA is just a way of saying, we're giving you a little bit of a little extra control over your information, and we want you to feel really good about what you're doing.
Right, right.
Yeah. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is something that I had a really hard time understanding when I was reading about it, which is functionally isolating your WordPress site. So my understanding, and hop in and correct me if I'm wrong, is that functionally isolating means that on your hosting provider, you have just the site that takes your donations. You're not having any of your side projects there. We're not hosting different kinds of, you know, we don't have our little blog also on the same host. It is just the site that takes your donations, and keeps that information siloed and isolated from anything else. So is the point of that to just ensure that if one thing happens, everything is not breached or intruded upon?
Yep. Can I tell you a
tell
horror story?
Yeah, horror story. I'm here for it.
All right. So I was cleaning hacked sites, and this ticket comes in, and it is an agency who has a hacked site. One of his customer sites. I get in there, it's a cPanel account, and there are 30 sites in the cPanel. Every single site is infected. So all of them had a malicious redirect to sort of the bad neighborhood of the internet, right, where malware was ending up on on people's computers. So we took all 30 sites. So this is an agency, and this is his customers' sites that he has all together. So we take the sites down so nobody else gets, redirected. And it was pretty easy to get that malicious redirect out because it was the same basic string on every single JavaScript page. There were like over 2,000 files on that hosting account that were infected with this malicious redirect. So get it all cleaned up, get everything locked down, all the passwords changed. Oh my gosh, it was like kind of a big deal. So it was hard to do just because of volume. So now it's intrusion detection time, like trying to figure out what the intrusion vector is. How did this happen? And log files for 30 sites. I'm going over every single one and just like trying to match up the time frame of when we see the malicious files. And then I find that so somebody had gotten into one of the sites and they had gone to the theme editor. They didn't even log in through FTP or anything. They just went to the theme editor for that site and they replaced the 404 page with a backdoor. And via that backdoor, they were able to just enter some text in there, and that wrote the malicious redirect across every file that was JavaScript that the PHP user could access. And because how cPanel is set up, all of those sites ran under the same user for the server. They had, different users for admin for each WP admin, but for the server, it was one PHP user. And because he had given admin access to one of his clients and one of his clients had been reusing passwords, somebody had gotten into that one site, but because they were all hosted in the same space, that malware was easily written to 30 of his client sites. And after we finished the cleanup, he's like, I guess I should probably put these on. Like, let's separate these out just to make things easier. Because then if it was separated out, just that one site would have been affected. But because they were all hosted in the same space on that same cPanel account, it was all of the sites got infected, and it made it a difficult cleanup process just because of the volume. So that's why, especially with your donations or any kind of commerce, really important to put it into an isolated space so that, some test site that you just spun up just to test and see if something worked right doesn't, and you forgot about, and it's got some malware or it's got some vulnerabilities in a plugin that you forgot to update because you forgot it was there. And I've seen tons of sites get hacked that way. Really, really important to just make sure that your commerce sites are isolated. They're in their own space. It's really tempting to just put everything all on one WordPress install. Even it's like, oh, well, we've got this course and we've got donation forms and we're going to sell some swag too and put it all on one WordPress instance. But it's a lot better if you just functionally isolate those things and really think through what goes on each individual function that you're trying to give to your customers and donors. So that's a little complicated, but from the back end, boy, when you see it happens, it's like, wow, I never want to see this happen. But I have been at so many WordCamps where I've talked to agency owners and they're like, wait a minute, this is going to cost me. How much? Okay, put them all in one basket. Go ahead, but you better watch that basket really carefully and really consider who you're giving admin access to. If you're going to do that, and you have to do that because of financiers or whatever, you better make some other financial considerations because cleaning up a breach and dealing with all the incident stuff is really hard.
Yeah. And we're going to get into like incident plans in a little bit, but I thought it was very interesting while you were telling me the story that, this breach happened to 30 client accounts because of one person who was using or reusing passwords. And that's the thing is like, you never know what somebody else is doing. Are they reusing a password? Was that password included in a breach? You'll never know until your things are infected. I do want to dig in a little bit more on the cost effectiveness. So we do have agencies who, build and manage nonprofit websites. And, I have no idea what their like funds are like, but something that you mentioned in your article was that it can be cost prohibitive for some people. So when you said that if you do absolutely have to keep them all in the same instance for cost purposes, you mentioned you have to really, really pay close attention. What do you mean by that?
It means that you have to harden all of your WordPress installs, and WordPress. If you just do a Google search for harden WordPress, it just means, like, for example, for that one site that had theme editing still turned on for that particular site, and the hacker was able to just wipe out that 404 file just using the WP admin theme editor. There is something you can add into your WP config that shuts that off.
Okay.
So you close down that intrusion vector. You don't give admin access to any of your clients. They can have contributor access. Maybe they can log in and they can, put something up, but you're the one that publishes it, just like the lowest level access for all of these people. There's other hardening things that I can't remember off the top of my head, but tons of things. Yeah, tons of things that you can do to just like harden your WordPress install and make sure that it is as secure as possible. Making sure I use Cloudflare on everything, just because it's like off your server. It blocks a ton of bad bot, because 90% of I don't even know. I'm throwing out a number, like I don't even know, but most of the attacks that we see are automated attacks. It's not like Darth Vader like coming at your site. It's like Darth Vader wrote a program in his mom's basement, or like some hacker in a Darth Vader outfit is in his mom's basement, wrote a script, and that script is like the army of bots that are out to try to find anybody who's got a vulnerability. So they're probing, looking for anything that they can exploit. So you want to make sure that all of those automated attacks are blocked off of your server, that they don't use server resources. And then there's other things you can do on server just to make things tighter as well. So I would really, and iThemes, Nathan Ingram just did a training on how to use Cloudflare for your site. They have a ton of free tools that make things really easy. And it's also really good if you ever have like any kind of like denial of service attack, a targeted attack for some reason. You're already set up on Cloudflare, and there's tools you can just like turn on to mitigate it. So I just highly recommend using Cloudflare as much as humanly possible.
This is a little bit of a different topic, but if I recall correctly, Cloudflare is one of the tools that we recommend for donor spam. So that's something that happens a lot within the nonprofit space, is because oftentimes there's not reCAPTCHAs and things like that. So they're able to just bot test all these different credit cards and see if they're working. And so Cloudflare is one way that we suggest kind of being able to put a stop to that, among some other things.
And they do have a new product called Turnstile, which is kind of like reCAPTCHA, but it has more privacy concerns, especially if you're dealing with GDPR and things like that. Turnstile is a great option to get away from reCAPTCHA and having to identify all the hills and the stoplights and things like that. So it's and if you're using iThemes security, reCAPTCHA is an option, as is HCAPTCHA, which is another version, but Cloudflare's Turnstile is in there as well. And it's a really useful tool for stopping any kind of automated attack, including carding attacks, which I think we're getting into in a bit. Don't want to jump ahead of myself.
If we don't, we can always circle back around to that. Before we move on to the next question, I do just want to remind everyone, Little Bear Sanctuary had a good question, which was, are these suggestions listed on your website so we can reference them after the live? If you scroll up a little bit, you'll see the Go link that ends in security, and that will take you directly to the article that Kathy wrote, where all of these tips plus everything else that we're going to be talking about today is referenced, along with links like the Let's Encrypt link is in there, so you can access the security certificate information. So you should be able to just go back there. Additionally, this will stay on YouTube. So once the live is over, it will be here as a recorded video, and you can always come back and reference it. And I will be adding timestamps for each tip and every little bit of information, so that you can just say, oh, what was that thing that she said about functionally isolating? Let me just click there, and then you just go right to that section. So always good to revisit if you need to. Okay, so the next part, I have a two-part question about. So this is about updates, right? So updating WordPress, updating your plugins, updating your themes. When we're talking about updates, generally speaking, what is the important reason that people need to update? And then follow-up question would be what are the best practices that nonprofits should use to ensure that they are thinking about updating and they're remembering, oh, right, I need to check and update that plugin. And is there even some sort of like auto update option that they can have?
Right. Yeah. WordPress just added, gosh, I don't know which version it was. It was over the last couple of years. They added auto updates as an option. So if you go into your plugin dashboard over on the far right, you'll see enable auto updates as an option. I'm a little I like attended in the apps world. They call it attended versus unattended updating, and this applies to not just plugins, but it applies to the Linux packages on the server. So there's this idea of attended versus unattended updates. So you have options of doing unattended updates. If updating is a problem for you, you can turn that on. Most of the major software providers in the plugin space have pretty good practices to make sure that any updates that they push out are pretty stable. But you're dealing with a lot of different things. So there's Give on your site. There's maybe Blocks plugins that are on your site. There's probably an SEO plugin.
You have Yoast. You have,
Yeah, I mean, the worst I've ever saw was like 100 plugins on a site. I was like, okay, some of these gotta go. This is a little much.
Are you really using all of these?
Exactly. Yeah. So, I'm pretty judicious in terms of like, all right, I better have a need and no other way to do this in order to put a plugin on my site. I make just some considerations in terms of that. So most of the major plugins, and it also depends on the site. Like my test sites, auto updates, I don't care, right? If anything, if I get a server 500 error, I'll deal with it. I don't care. My personal site, same thing. It's like, I don't want to mess with updates. Just keep it updated for me. I know what's on there and it's pretty limited. For a donation-based site where you lose money if there's a problem with the site, I would recommend an update process. First, I would recommend that you have a staging server on which you test an update before you put it on production. So you have a staging server where you test everything functionally that's going to change on your site, test things there, then apply those updates. So it looks good on staging, everything looks okay, test all my pages, test my donation, make sure it goes through, okay. And then test it, and then you'd go on to production, and then you do the updates, and again, test everything there. That is an attended update. And for a mission critical site like your donation site, I would highly recommend that is the process that you use. Test it on stage, and once a week, let's say Wednesday, don't do Fridays, because if something goes wrong, you want your weekend, right?
We never push anything on a Friday.
Yeah. Like once a week, just go and check and see, okay, is anything need to be updated? And then I have a strategy for updates in which I will look, so you have version numbers, right? So you have like Cadence that I work very tightly with. We're coming out with 3.0, which is super exciting, but it's a major update. So we've been like, we're on 2.6.7, okay, and then 2.6.8 comes up. Yeah, auto update that or whatever. That I know, I'm pretty confident that's just bug fixes,
right? It's just
or real
fix, a little update, right?
Right. So I will go through my updates. I'll look at my plugin dashboard and I'll say, okay, what are minor updates? And I'll do all of those first and then kind of test everything. Everything looks okay. All right. WooCommerce, maybe. Okay, we've got a big update. We're going to a brand new version here. Then perhaps that is something that I'm going to want to test on staging, make sure everything's okay, make a backup before I do this update. And that update I'm going to treat very differently than a 2.6.7 to 2.6.8. We're going to 3.0. I'm backing up everything. I'm going to run it on staging, make sure everything works. Mission critical sites. If you go down and you're going to lose money for a couple of hours because your site has a 500 error and you have to troubleshoot that, you want to prevent that from happening. So that's my strategy for doing updates. Having had to do it for like companies that don't lose any money over this hour. It's just like, no problem. Everything's going to be just fine.
we've got it under control. So you mentioned backups, which is our next topic. So backups are something that you do before updates, right? So how do those help with site security, and kind of what is the point of backing up before you do big updates specifically?
Right. Well, I would have up, especially for donation-based sites or commerce sites where the contents of your database, the transaction data is being changed fairly frequently. I would have a very, I don't want to say aggressive, that's not the right word, but I would have a very regular backup schedule. I would ensure that my hosting provider is backing up, and I would test those backups and see, can I restore this backup? Is it, or is this backup process have a problem and these things are corrupt? You want to know that. Because what use is backups if they're not going to work, right? So you want to make sure for a donation-based site that you're backing up very frequently. I would say at a minimum every 8 hours, and make sure either your host is doing it or that you're doing it, and you're backing up off the server. If that server, if the hard drive fails, if something goes wrong with that server, if it gets hacked and everything gets wiped out, including all of your backups, you want to make sure your backups are stored elsewhere, and you want to test those backups. In terms of security, backups are incredibly important because if you do detect that there's an intrusion on your site, a hacker's in there, site's getting redirected, something's gone wrong, do you want to clean that site by hand, or would you want to find the last most recent clean backup and restore? And then patch whatever do the incident response, and then patch everything and make sure everything's okay. But a backup could be the first line of defense in saving your team tons of time in making sure the site's back up and functional.
Yeah. Okay. So that's, it essentially is like almost like a rollback.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Very good. So the next thing is we've kind of moved past these various tips and things, and we want to talk about what happens if you do get breached. And so in marketing, what I would call this is a crisis communication plan.
Yeah.
In this instance, it's a breach or intrusion plan, right? So essentially, these are response plans that help an organization ensure that they understand how to move forward if there's a breach or intrusion. What needs to be included in these plans?
Right. This is going to be unique to each individual organization, but the reason why you want an intrusion or an incident response plan, if anything happens, in psychology, they talk about how, like, when you're under stress, you can't take in as much information. So it goes from being like 7 plus or minus 2 bits of information that you can perceive and consider when you're not under stress. And it goes down to like nothing when your boss is yelling at you because the site's down and hackers are in there and our customers' data is, you can't think. So you want to think ahead of time all of the things that could possibly go wrong. So you pull out the plan and it's like, okay, you do this, you have everything. It's kind of like, if you live in, you live in Florida where hurricanes can happen, and you have a go bag, and if you see a hurricane heading your way, you have to know what to do, and you have a plan in place. I lived in California, fires, like go bag, I'm frightened, like, gosh, please, is that smoke from far away or smoke from here? You can't think when you're under stress. So planning helps you put a plan in place, because there's key things you have to know. First of all, who are the people who are the stakeholders?
Right.
Is customer data involved? You have to basically identify all of the things that, like, if customers' data is involved, what do you do? If customer data is not involved, what do you do? Crisis communication, very important, a part of that. It's not just crisis communication to your customers if that data is breached, but it's crisis communication to your boss, to the investment company, that whoever's higher up, like, is the media.
How do you have to tell the board? We have to talk to media. We have internal stakeholders. We need to inform our IT department, or we need to inform this department or that department. We also then, if customer data is included, how do we deliver that message in a solution-oriented way to ensure that they have all the information, and this is what we're doing going forward to ensure that we don't have a breach in the future.
Right, exactly. So it's really important to have some kind of way to detect intrusions iThemes Security has file change detection. So if files are changing, it emails you and says, hey, this stuff has changed. And 90% of it, well, most of the time, it's just your cache files have changed. Like, thanks, iThemes Security.
Appreciate it.
Just to test, it's working, right? But if you see files changing and it's like, wait, I didn't update what's going on, that's your
Right.
first line of defense. That means you can act really fast because you want to be able to act as quickly as possible to shut down the intrusion. If the hacker's in the site, I've cleaned sites with hackers just like, oh man, what, you're back? What are you doing? Okay, I've got to go like figure out, oh, the theme's got it. I don't have this like paid theme. I've got to get
Right.
this patched like before I can even clean this. Like active intrusion, if that is happening, you need to lock that down. That's your first line of defense, to get the
Mhm.
information, lock that down. And then, of course, do incident response and look at where the problem, what was the intrusion, where did it come from. So you need to find indications of compromise, like is this a hacker that is just changing these particular files,
Mhm.
or is this someone who's like taking over the whole site? Are internal systems impacted at all of these things go into incident response planning. And I'll tell you what, I saw some data from AT&T, who of course sell major security things to major companies that are trying to protect against ransomware and all kinds of things. And they have shown that companies that have this kind of proactive security posture and do incident response planning, they actually have better sales because they're thinking into the future. So it's like this mindset of, we're going to protect our systems going forward. It actually changes the mindset of people who are involved in the organization, because they're not just thinking about the security of their systems, they're thinking about how does their organization operate into the future, and they have better like sales numbers. So AT&T has actually drawn that correlation of how
Mhm.
security is good for business, and going through that kind of exercise of incident response planning puts that in everyone's mind, because it's not just the security team, it's not just the web team, it's everybody in the organization considers, what do we do if this
Mhm.
bad thing happens? And it
Mhm.
changes how people think about things. And so it's a really good exercise for people to do.
That's really interesting that you brought that up about AT&T, because I actually spoke with an organization not that long ago, and they're not a nonprofit, they're a for-profit organization, but they had a massive breach, which required them to kind of change the way that people access their accounts. They added in two-factor authentication, they did a couple different things, and they took the time, of course, to say, this is what happened, this was the point of intrusion, this is what we're doing about it. And
Yeah.
they had their biggest sales day ever the day that they made that announcement, and it was like, wow, because not only does it like change things internally, but externally, even there was a breach, and you would think like people would be like, oh man, I'm not going to be here anymore. They were like, okay, but you handled it really well. You told us what's happening and you made immediate changes. And so I do still feel very safe, and I'm going to continue to work with you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Really well.
Communicating with customers with that, with confidence and honesty, and just being really truthful. I've seen some organizations that have not been, like, they blame an upstream provider or something like that, and they're really missing out on an opportunity to show, um, just a trustworthiness, to
Mhm.
show that we're going to be honest with you. Like, we're
Mhm.
human. Bad things happen sometimes. And
Yeah.
this thing, it slipped through the cracks, but here's what we're doing about it. Such an opportunity to grow
Yeah.
connection of trust with your audience.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's really interesting because I think a lot of people are, we were talking about it in the very beginning of the call, where you have really big companies that have breaches and have intrusions, and they've got round the clock IT and security teams, so, and they don't see a whole lot of pushback from that. I mean, the Twitter breach barely made the news. And so I think that there's this idea where it's like a taboo topic to talk about, but these big companies, there's not generally huge ramifications because they handle it really well, and they're
Right.
authentic and transparent about what happened and what the solution is.
Yep. But the AT&T, in that same study, they did, I can't remember the exact statistics, but many small businesses that have a breach, depending on how in depth it is or
Mhm.
how bad it is, it does affect their ability to continue in business. So, the business itself can have problems if you don't handle it well. Gosh, I wish I knew that number off the top of my head, but I don't. Not that one. I know the other ones, my other numbers, but it can have ramifications. Having that plan in place is just
Yeah.
so critically important. And these big organizations, they have those plans. The company that I was talking about before that had the guy that was reusing passwords and was using his company address.
Yeah.
They actually went out of business eventually because of the breach that they suffered. It was pretty bad. They got into every system and ransomware and everything. So
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that's a really good point that you make about small businesses, because I do think that it can be a really large undertaking if you have a pretty in-depth breach. Especially, if you're like a 2 or 3 person team, or you're a volunteer run organization. I would have no idea what to do if my site got hacked. I'd just be like, well, I guess I'm just gonna give it up. But but that is where it is really important to have like a managed host who's helping you with a couple of behind the scenes things with the updates and the backups and things. But then also something like, and I know we're not necessarily here to shill iThemes, but having something like iThemes security that can kind of just keep you, looped in on what's happening and alert you to any sort of like potentially malicious activity on your site. So
yeah.
keeping that in mind, the next thing that we want to talk about is actually being able to like understand the different types of malicious attacks, and then also how to spot them. So some of those things like include, phishing and spear phishing and some other things. Can you give us like an overview of these types of attacks and what maybe people should be looking for?
Right. Well, I would separate attacks into 2 categories. There would be like malware kinds of attacks. And most of that is going to come from probing for vulnerabilities on your site and trying to put malware on your systems, or probing for vulnerabilities on your office network and looking for computers that haven't been patched, or a browser that has a vulnerability. We just had an announcement this week that Safari had an active 0-day that was being exploited. So those types of, it's not just your WordPress site that you got to keep updated.
Right.
You keep up everything updated. And then the other thing that I think is more critical and more important and more vulnerable is the people aspect, which would be social engineering, would be the general term that security experts use to describe phishing, spear phishing, those kinds of attacks that are targeting the weakest element, the humans. And so a phishing attack would typically, those happen through email. You can also get smishing attacks that'll come through text messages, and then you can even get phone calls that are socially engineering individuals in a company. So it's really important to train your people and make sure that you get them some kind of phishing training so that they are trained in how to recognize these types of things. Some of them are just so apparent, it's just obvious, but then there's plenty of them that are really tricky. And you can even have situations that just happened this weekend with a major hosting company that had something happen with their email list. A compromise happened, not quite sure exactly how. They're not really being super forthright about it, but they got into that system and were able to send out phishing attacks that bypassed all of the filters and went into people's inboxes and were fairly sophisticated in terms of how, the links were all like to the hosting company. So I wonder if this company is using a different hosting. It was a complicated type of thing. It wasn't like, I think some novice users may have clicked on some of those links. So it's really it. And here's the thing with nonprofits, you have already self-selected yourself into a place where we know you care. We know you want the world to be a better place.
Got a big old heart. Yeah.
You have a great heart. So make sure your people are trained to recognize anything that could exploit the greatest thing about your people, that they want to make the world a better place, and that they are not vulnerable to something that pulls at the heartstrings, or something that is trying to get people to do something that they normally wouldn't, because we've got this urgency, or this family could be, bad things can happen and urgency and everything. So those kinds of really targeted attacks would be the thing that I can be concerned most with for a nonprofit, because we know you care.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's the really interesting thing about social engineering, is that it's called social engineering because they are engineering human nature, right? So they
Yes.
are taking all these different considerations about human nature as a whole, but then they are also probably doing a little bit of background, and it's a little bit more targeted, and they're going, okay, this person really cares about dogs because they run a dog shelter, and
Right.
I am going to engineer an attack that takes advantage of their great big heart and their love for animals. And then they hit you with urgency. They hit you with something that needs to be solved that only you can solve. And then before you know it, you're clicking on links and you're doing things, and then that's it for you. I wanted to also kind of go back a little bit when we were talking about phishing, and you mentioned doing some general awareness training around phishing. And Kathy, you might remember this. Kathy and I work for the same parent company, and over Christmas they sent out an email that was like, "We want you to take advantage of this Christmas gift. Here's a link so that you can put your address and stuff in." And all of us were like, "We're not clicking on that link." And then we finally had to like Slack everyone and say, like, this is not a phishing attack. Like, this is not a test. Like, really, please go make sure that you sign up using that link. But everyone thought it was so funny because all of us were like, nope, we're not doing that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, which is great. You want people to, the biggest thing you want to do is to put space between the receipt of that email or the receipt of that SMS or whatever message it is. If there's urgency associated, just put some space. Talk to somebody else. Just don't take action immediately, because nothing is that urgent. Like my mom used to always say, that nothing is blood plasma. I mean, but it's like nothing's going to be that urgent. If you don't take action today, that urgency might still be there tomorrow. Just put some space, and 90% of the time you just do that and take that urgency out of it, then it expands out the stress. The stress is gone, so that your psychology is in a better place to make better decisions.
A little bit clearer.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing I want to note too is there are so many different ways that people will try to take advantage of you. So I work also with Los Angeles County on their homeless initiative, and I oversee all of their social media marketing. And I got a text this morning from someone in the organization with a screenshot of a Facebook email that they had received. It looked very legitimate. It had the Facebook logo. It looked like it came from some sort of Facebook email. And it was like, you have violated your page's terms and conditions. You need to go to this link to verify who you are. And I was like, don't click it. Like, it's a scam. It's a scam. Don't click it. So like just taking a second and checking even in with somebody else. Like, does this feel legitimate to you, or what do you think? And just kind of getting some space, gaining some clarity, and maybe reaching out to someone else and just saying, like, this kind of is weird. What do you think?
Yep. Yeah. Just having that space is the best defense, because they're trying to get you to act before you think. So you want to think before you act.
Your heart jumps way ahead of your brain. You're like, I need to do something about this. This is really important to me. Or it seems like it's like very time sensitive. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. That's how they get you.
That is how they get you, especially when it comes to those emails and text messages. And, we get a lot of DMs to our page with phishing attempts, because we are a nonprofit software. And so there's a lot of like, oh, they'll help me out. I'm going to send, this like DM about how much help I need. And I'm just like, we're just going to mark that as spam and we're going to move on with our lives. But so overall, and we are like, we're going to have to go a little bit over so that we can do some Q&A, but overall, generally speaking, following some guidelines that you set for your organization and being proactive is the best, firewall that you can put up on your site at all, right? So if, all of these tips are great tips. You may not be able to implement all of them, but you should absolutely be implementing the ones that you can be consistent with, and that, you're not going to forget, later on down the road. Do you have any additional kind of like tips or considerations you want people to think about before we move into the Q&A?
Yeah. I think the only thing is, security, hackers, the word hacker, and just connotes fear in people's minds, right?
Mhm.
People are like, ooh, hackers got into this thing. And it's like this fear-based thing. I have been working in security for quite some time, and most of what I see is pretty low level bot stuff. It's
Mhm.
very rare that somebody's like, I'm going after this company. Not to say that that doesn't happen, it does happen,
Mhm.
but the majority of the time, it's not something to, well, first of all, you don't want to act from fear. You
Right.
want to act from being in a proactive place and educated. The
Mhm.
more you learn about security and the more you learn about WordPress security and protecting your WordPress site, protecting all of your systems, the more educated you are, the less fear that there's going to be. So if it's scary and it's like, I don't want to deal with it, just we have tons of resources on the iThemes side to help you kind of understand just the ramifications of this. The Give team is very security aware. It's really neat to see how fast everybody acts when, there's, I know there's been like vulnerabilities and you guys
Mhm.
like fix it right away and so open about what's going on and what people need to do. Just like that's the kind of thing you want to see in an organization. So much great information that's out there, and we're here to support you in getting educated, so it's not a fear-based thing. It's just
Yeah.
have to learn a few things. So
Yeah. So really quick before we move on, Drew will pop in one more link and it's going to take you to iThemes where you can learn more about iThemes security and they actually have various programs that you might be interested in. So you're going to go ahead and want to check that out. But we are going to go ahead and move into question and answer. This first one I'm actually going to take, if you don't mind, which is the question is about the Akismet setup and do we still need to have the GiveWP reCAPTCHA plugin active if you have Akismet? So the answer there is no, unless you are still getting spam donations, even though you have Akismet active on your site. So if that's still an issue, you might want to go ahead and keep the reCAPTCHA, but I know the reCAPTCHA is an issue sometimes on donation forms and kind of like the look and overall we don't love it. So unless you are still having an issue with donor spam, you can go ahead and turn that reCAPTCHA off. Drew's going to drop a link right there. That's going to take you to our documentation where we cover all the various ways that you can handle spam donations. One of the easiest things to do also is to increase your minimum donation. So if you have no minimum donation or you have a low minimum donation, that's still going to allow people to test these fraudulent credit cards on your website because they only want to test it at a couple bucks. They're not trying to set off an alert within this person's bank account system. And so there are just testing $5 or $10 at a time. If you feel that that's not going to inspire giving, then I understand that that's a little bit of a trigger. But at a minimum, you should just have a minimum donation amount and not leave it at zero or no minimum donation. Okay, great. So we're going to go kind of back to when we were talking about auto updates. And so this user has asked that she has most of her plugins on auto updates and that she says that they have had a few issues with WP plugin. We can kind of just like put that to the side for a second and think about it a little bit more holistically. Is
yeah.
it possible that having auto updates turned on for your plugin could be a source for issues within those plugins?
Yeah, that's why I prefer on especially a mission critical site, I
Mhm.
prefer attended updates so that you do the update, you're present, you're there, you're watching, you're
You see what's
testing,
happening,
and
right?
you're making sure that everything's okay on that mission critical site. Test sites, whatever, auto
Yeah.
update kind of stuff. But each site's going to be different. But
Mhm.
if your bottom line is affected by a site, I would do attended updates and
Okay.
just have a process, test it on staging, then test it in or test it on you are still testing in production as well because you're
Mhm.
doing a change. And
Right.
so you want to make sure that you test that change, make sure like if you're updating Give WP, make sure do a donation right away, make sure that it goes through all right. Systems look good, everything's fine. I'm sure you guys have like test support types of things of like things to watch for specifically with Give,
Mhm.
but yeah, I would do, because you don't have to set like all auto updates. It's like, okay, well, this plugin never updates, but when it does, it's like really minor stuff. And so
Right. It's a
maybe you want to do auto updates for that. So I would just be like really judicious about using auto updates. But for a donation site, I wouldn't do auto updating.
Yeah. It's, and especially on, like we were talking about, okay, maybe you auto update Yoast, but you're not auto updating Give WP, right? Like that is a absolute
That's a
mission critical thing
possibility.
that you need to
Yeah.
have, working. And so ensuring that you are on top of those updates yourself is super important, which she has they have a follow-up question to do updates manually. They did share in the chat that they have since turned off their auto updates due to our conversation. So, but I think the question is more about like, how often should you check for updates, or what's the best practice and best process for ensuring that you are staying on top of manually updating your plugins?
I would just set every Wednesday, set a reminder in your calendar and on your phone, or, choose a day, the day that you have the least meetings and the least
Mhm.
stress. Just set your morning while you're doing your coffee. That's the time you're going to just check and see what needs to be updated. It's really important, though, also to be on some kind of notification if there's security vulnerabilities. iThemes has a weekly security vulnerability roundup that we
They
do,
sure
and so we
do.
mail that out every Wednesday. And so you want to know, like, oh, like it just went out this morning, and there's at
Mhm.
least 2 or 3 plugins that I use on my sites that I will be updating this afternoon because there are known vulnerabilities. And there's stuff that's I don't have on auto update on some important sites. So you want to be notified of that kind
Mhm.
of thing. So whether it's through iThemes, or we just partnered with PatchStack, they have a database that we're leveraging for our plugin, but they are a CNA, or was it Certified Numbering Authority, or CVE Numbering Authority? That's what CNA stands for. And they keep a database of all of the vulnerabilities for WordPress. So PatchDeck is just a great team and really brilliant security professionals. So a couple of resources there. You just want to stay on top of things.
Yeah. I'm going to go ahead and drop the iThemes vulnerability report right in the chat. And like she said, it comes out weekly and it will cover any vulnerabilities that are or have happened in the WordPress space since the last report went out.
Yep.
And so that is a great way to kind of just keep vigilant about the various things that are happening. If you're not checking, specifically for each plugin and vulnerability, and maybe something happens on a Thursday, the day after you just updated everything, you don't want to wait 6 days, to update that. So keeping an eye out for vulnerabilities is super important. So I would definitely give that report a follow. And
And
then,
the plugin itself will also email you. Like
oh,
if you're
perfect.
running a specific plugin, say, I think Rank Math SEO
Mhm.
had a vulnerability this week. So if you're running that and you have iThemes security and it's configured to send you emails, then you'll get a notification like, hey, time for an update that you weren't planning on. So,
You weren't planning for this one, but here you go. Have fun with that. And, for the most part, the thought process is that when we experience a vulnerability at Give WP, we are extremely transparent
yeah.
about needing what happened, and that you need it's a critical update specifically, and so we try to get that out across all channels through email, social media, and so you just want to just be a little bit more vigilant about that portion of things.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, a lot of the WordCamp talks that I've done at various WordCamps have been about evaluating plugins. And
Mhm.
that, there's tons of different, when you commit to a plugin, all your data's in that plugin. So it's like really important to be judicious about who you're going to use for certain things. And one of the primary determinations of what plugin that I'm going to use is, how do they handle security reports? Do they put it in their change log and be very specific about what they're fixing? Do they send notifications out to their customers? Do they even say something on social? Hey, we had a bug, a celebrity bug, this
Yeah.
vulnerability, and we've got it patched. So make sure you update.
Yeah.
How are they handling? Because we're all human, and
Mhm.
vulnerabilities are are not something that like, oh, they've had a vulnerability. It's not judgmental type of thing. It's like, how do they respond to vulnerabilities? Because everybody has them.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, obviously if you have plugins having, vulnerabilities every other day, it's like, okay, well, maybe not. But how do they communicate with you? Because software, in my mind, is all about trust, much like being a nonprofit is all about trust. And so the software that you decide to invite into your digital home, I think give you guys really set the standard of like how well you communicate these types of things. You've done just such, and I've known you guys for like
Yeah.
forever. I I think
But
gosh,
she's
I think
not
I
biased.
interviewed.
She's not biased. She still means what she's saying.
I did well. I know I've been in the WordPress space for a really long time, and so like there were vulnerabilities like years ago, and I actually like interviewed Matt Cromwell about one of them, and we just talked about like what it's like, what's the process like. It was really interesting, and so the way you guys handle these kinds of things, it's just like really dovetails with my philosophy on security, and so that's my stamp of approval as a security person that Give knows what they're doing.
I'll pass that on to someone who's not on the marketing team and doesn't do anything except send out the notifications.
Perfect.
Okay, good. All right. Well, we are going to wrap it up. So again, if you need to know anything more about iThemes security, the link is in the chat. The iThemes vulnerability report is also in the chat. And there is a link to the article that Kathy wrote for us. And after the stream is over, you can just revisit us on YouTube and it'll be right there available for you. And you're able to kind of rewatch or pick out different parts that you need. So feel free to do that. But Kathy, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
This is a lot of fun. So thank you for having me.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.